I opened a drawer, searching for spare batteries. My fingers touched a hard case. It was dark blue velvet, the edges fuzzy. I paused, then pulled it out. He opened it. Inside lay a necklace. A thin platinum chain, dangling a medium-sized diamond. The cut was exquisite, and even in the dim light of the rental room, it still managed to gleam a bit. 5 years ago, I sold everything of value except this. Somehow, I kept it. Maybe I wanted to leave it as a reminder of what a joke those days were. Or maybe it was a reminder to never be stupid again. Mom. Where's my car? Brian ran in barefoot, his face flushed from sleep, a few hairs on his head sticking up stubbornly. I snapped the box shut and stuffed it back into the drawer. It's under the sofa, look for it yourself. I ruffled his messy hair, which felt like tender grass just sprouting in spring. Go wash your face and brush your teeth, you'll be late. Oh. He immediately forgot about the car, turned around and ran out in a hurry. I looked at his back, and the hard spot in my chest suddenly filled with a warm, sore feeling. Brian. My son. The treasure I'd traded everything for. After dropping Brian off at preschool, I went grocery shopping. Pushing the cart, I carefully budgeted in the sale section. 5 years of single motherhood had long since worn away that detached air in me. Now? Daily necessities, diapers, and tuition were my primary battleground. Buy one, get one free on this brand of yogurt. What a bargain! I muttered, tiptoeing to reach the back row of the freezer. Just as my fingertips touched the cool packaging, a bony hand reached out from beside me. It was long, clean, and its nails meticulously manicured. A watch sat on my wrist, a discreet platinum-colored watch, its dial gleaming with a cold, hard sheen under the supermarket lights. I knew that watch. Or rather, I used to be incredibly familiar with it. A name, carrying with it all the cold, sticky sensations I'd deliberately forgotten over the past 5 years, suddenly struck my mind. David. My heart felt like it was being gripped by an invisible hand, stopping suddenly before pounding again. Blood rushed to my head, and my ears were ringing. I turned my head stiffly. It was really him. David. He seemed the same. No, he was more indescribable. Time seemed only to imbue him with a more compelling aura. His brows were still deep and sharp, his jawline taut. His impeccably tailored dark gray suit stood out against the bustling supermarket. He was looking at me, too. His gaze first settled on my hand, which was standing on tiptoe, straining to reach the yogurt. Then, it slowly moved upwards, glancing over my washed-out t-shirt, then over my makeup-free, slightly tired face. Finally, it stopped at my eyes. The look in his eyes was like examining an old object, lost and then recovered, now completely unrecognizable. Surprise? Confusion? Disbelief? None. It was a cold, scrutinizing, angry inquiry. His thin lips moved slightly, as if he was about to say something. The next second, a name uttered clearly from his lips. It wasn't mine. It was another woman's name. The name that had, like a curse, entangled my entire, unbearable career as a double. Zena? His voice was deep, carrying the certainty of someone who had long held a position of power. It penetrated the background noise of the supermarket and reached my ears with pinpoint accuracy. The string in my head, which had been tense for 5 years, snapped. All the fear and panic I felt the moment I heard that name were replaced by an even more intense, burning rage. A substitute? 5 years later, he still called me by that woman's name when he first saw me? Zena? I pulled the corners of my mouth, my voice trembling slightly because of the efforts to suppress it, but it was extremely clear. David, your eyesight is not very good? Or are you suffering from Alzheimer's? His brows tightened instantly, his eyes suddenly became as sharp as a knife, and an oppressive low pressure emanated from his body. Tracy? He finally said my name, a tone of gritted teeth confirming it. I'm glad you still remembered. I jerked my hand away, no longer looking at the discounted yogurt, and gripped the shopping cart handle so hard my knuckles turned white. "Excuse me." I pushed the cart, practically knocking him out of the way, and walked forward without looking back. My steps were weak, but my back was straight. I couldn't give in. "Tracy, I couldn't give in." "Stop." A cold voice came from behind me, carrying an unquestionable command. I didn't stop. Instead, I walked even faster. My heartbeat was so fast it felt like it was about to burst out of my throat. "Stop her." His voice was low, but it was enough to draw several men in black casual clothes who looked like ordinary customers to gather around me, blocking my way. The supermarket security guard looked over here in confusion. I stopped abruptly, turned around, and stared at the man a few steps away. "David. What do you want to do? In broad daylight, are you trying to kidnap me?" He approached, his leather shoes clacking against the polished tiles. Each step felt like treading on my taut nerves. He stopped in front of me, his tall figure almost completely looming over me. We were so close. So close that I could smell the familiar, cold scent of cedar mixed with tobacco. It was a suffocating smell from the past. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze like a concrete icicle, grazing my face inch by inch until it finally settled on my chest, which was heaving slightly with anger and tension. "5 years, he began, his voice as cold as ice. "Tracy, you've been hiding long enough." "Hide?" I forced myself to meet his gaze and sneered, "David, you're joking. We've been through this together for a long time. I'm just living my life, why would I hide? We're even?" He said, as if he'd heard some ridiculous joke. A cold arc curved his lips. "You stole the contents of my safe and disappeared without a trace. You call that even? Stole things?" I was stunned for a moment, then my rage intensified. "What did I take? Those shabby jewelry? Or the pocket money you, David, gave me as your replacement?" I raised my voice, drawing even more attention. "I didn't touch a single cent of that stuff. I left it all in that apartment." "What?" "David's family is so wealthy, and he still needs that little bit of money, so he's chasing me, your replacement, to collect the debt." I bit the word substitute hard. His eyes suddenly became extremely dangerous, staring at me as if he wanted to eat me alive. The atmosphere around us dropped to freezing point. The security guards stood in a circle with expressionless faces, blocking out the curious gazes from outside. "Money?" He scoffed, his eyes piercing me like a hawk. "Tracy, don't play dumb. What's the most important thing you took with you?" My heart sank, like a plunge into an icy cave. He knew? Impossible. "I don't know what you're talking about." I denied it flatly, but my voice couldn't help but tremble slightly. He caught it. His eyes became more determined, with an almost cruel understanding. "I don't know?" He repeated slowly, his gaze like a searchlight, searching my face for every subtle change. "That child." Boom. Those 3 words exploded in my mind like a bomb. Everything went blank. My blood froze, and my hands and feet became ice cold. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt like it was blocked, and no sound came out. I could only grip the metal handle of the shopping cart tightly, the cold touch the only reality in this moment. He saw my reaction. Everything was self-evident. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were deep, churning with undercurrents I couldn't decipher. "That child," he repeated slowly, each word emphasized. "Where is he?" Panic, like a cold vine, instantly wrapped around my limbs, tightening ever tighter. I couldn't let him know about Brian. I absolutely couldn't. "What child?" I forced myself to calm down, digging my nails into my palms, using the pain to stay awake. "David, are you crazy? Or is it that your beloved Xena can't have children, so crazy that you just grab a former double and ask about the child?" At the mention of Xena, his eyes suddenly turned cold. A cold rage almost materialized. But he didn't react. He just stared at me, like a venomous snake stalking its prey. Tracy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. His voice was terrifyingly low, carrying an undeniable threat. 5 years ago, before you left, the last physical examination report showed that you were pregnant. He knew. He even found out this. I was cold all over and my teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. That report was a misdiagnosis. I practically yelled, my voice cracking. I'm not pregnant at all. I just had stomach discomfort. Later, the follow-up checkup showed I was fine. David, are you sick? Why are you so obsessed with a misdiagnosis report? Misdiagnosis? He sneered, obviously not believing a word he said. Well, since you insist it's a misdiagnosis, do you dare to come with me for a paternity test? Paternity test? My eyes went dark and I almost fell. You're crazy. I screamed uncontrollably. Why should I go with you for a paternity test? Who are you to me? What qualifications do you have? Qualifications? He took a step forward, and the overwhelming pressure almost suffocated me. Because the child in your belly might be bleeding my blood. Because I'm David. His voice was quiet, but it carried a resolute arrogance and determination. You're crazy. You're crazy. I pushed the shopping cart, desperately trying to break through the security guards. Get out of my way. I'm calling the police. I'm suing you for harassment. Call the police? He waved his hand, as if he'd heard something utterly ridiculous. A security guard immediately stepped forward and said in a calm voice, Tracy, David just wants to confirm some facts. Please cooperate. His tone was polite, but his actions carried an irresistible force. My shopping cart was pinned down, unable to move. A feeling of helplessness and despair washed over me. Like a trapped animal, I struggled in vain. People were already whispering and pointing around. The supermarket security guard hesitated, seemingly afraid to step forward. David's name, in this city, was both an invisible golden sign and a formidable iceberg. Tracy, his voice rang out again, are you going to tell me where that child is, or should I send someone to search the entire city, inch by inch? Or, he paused, his eyes scanning my pale face, I'll call the kindergarten right now and find out who sent a little boy named Brian to school this morning? Brian. He knew Brian's name. He even found out that. A crushing fear, like an icy hand, instantly gripped my throat. All my resistance was utterly fragile before the sheer force and overwhelming information. My blood seemed to be drained from me instantly, my hands and feet were ice cold, even my fingertips were trembling. I looked at him, at his bottomless, cold eyes, and the despair I felt 5 years ago came flooding back. At that time I was lying on the cold operating table, listening to the doctor's cold declaration that I might be infertile for life. And he, on the phone, in order to appease the angry Bai Guang, said lightly, it's just a substitute, just for fun, Zena, why do you care? Just a stand-in. Just a joke. Those 2 words pierced my heart, completely freezing the last shred of my ridiculous fantasy about him. Now, what right did he have? What right did he have to question me about Brian in such a condescending, claiming manner? Anger overwhelmed fear, surging in my chest like magma. Okay. I heard my own voice, unusually calm, even with a hint of an icy smile. David, don't you want to know if the child is yours? He raised an eyebrow, seemingly unprepared for my sudden change of heart. I'll go with you to get a paternity test. I stared into his eyes, speaking each word carefully. But I want you to pick up the child yourself. Now, immediately. His eyes flickered, as if assessing my intentions. What? David doesn't dare? I raised my lips sarcastically. Are you afraid of seeing the child and discovering you really have a bastard? The word bastard pricked him like a needle. His face darkened. Lead the way, he said coldly. At the kindergarten gate. It was still some time before school was over. I sat in the back seat, pressed against the door, trying to stay as far away from him as possible. His oppressive, cold aura permeated every pore. He closed his eyes, leaning back against the leather seat, his fingers tapping unconsciously on his knees. He was waiting, like a dormant beast, waiting for its prey. Time ticked by, each second feeling like a century. Finally, the school bell rang. Like a flock of happy birds, the children chirped and streamed out the door. My eyes searched the crowd eagerly. Finally, I spotted that familiar little figure. Brian, his little dinosaur backpack on his back, was excitedly chatting with the kid next to him, his cheeks flushed. "That's him," I said hoarsely, pointing out the window. David's eyes snapped open, his sharp gaze fixed on the tiny figure. He leaned forward slightly, staring intently at Brian through the dark-tinted car window. His eyes were complex beyond description. There was scrutiny, inquiry, shock, and perhaps even a subtle fluctuation that even he himself hadn't noticed. Brian seemed to sense something and glanced suspiciously in the direction of our car. My heart leaped into my throat. David pushed open the car door, took a long step, and stepped out. His presence seemed to carry a spotlight and a chilling aura. The surrounding noises subsided slightly. Several parents and teachers stared in surprise at this suddenly appearing, imposing man. Brian also noticed him. The little boy was visibly stunned, his eyes wide with curiosity as he stared at this giant uncle who suddenly appeared before him, like he had walked out of a TV. David walked up to Brian step by step and squatted down. His eyes were level with the little guy. He was silent, his eyes like a searchlight, carefully scanning Brian's face, eyebrows, eyes, nose, mouth. That look was so focused that it was almost greedy, and it also carried a kind of harsh scrutiny. Brian felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by him, and subconsciously took a small step back, his big dark eyes filled with confusion and a little timidity. "Uncle?" Brian called out softly and tentatively. The soft, sticky uncle was like a feather brushing through the frozen air. David's body stiffened imperceptibly. He stared into Brian's large, clear, innocent, yet slightly nervous eyes. The shape of those eyes was so much like his own. And the slightly pursed lips, the faint outline between his brows. Time seemed to stand still at that moment. David just squatted there, motionless. All his sharpness, coldness, and control seemed to be hit by something more primitive and unfamiliar when facing this ignorant and innocent child. Was it the pull of blood? Or the crushing impact of the ironclad reality? I couldn't discern the emotion in his eyes, only saw his Adam's apple rise and fall several times, as if he were about to say something, but in the end, no words came out. He slowly, very slowly, raised his hand. With a barely perceptible tremor, he hesitantly and cautiously reached for Brian's soft hair. Just as his fingertips were about to touch the soft hair. "Brian!" I flung open the car door and practically pounced, pulling my son into a tight embrace. Like a mother animal protecting her cub, I used my body to block David's hands and the complicated gaze he was casting at Brian. I glared warily at the man still squatting on the ground, filled with hostility. "Mom?" Brian, held tightly in my arms, was a little dazed. He buried his little face in my arms and called out muffledly. This mom was like a key, instantly unlocking David's petrified state. He suddenly raised his eyes and looked at me. His eyes were no longer the complex and almost dazed tenderness he had just shown when facing Brian, but instantly frozen to ice again, filled with offended anger and deeper inquiry. He stood up, his towering presence once again bringing a strong sense of oppression. He looked down at me, clutching the child, his eyes sharp as a knife. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice returning to its usual coldness. "Go to the hospital. Paternity testing center." Brian leaned against me, curious yet a little nervous, his little hands clutching the edge of my clothes tightly, his big eyes occasionally glancing at the eerily silent giant uncle next to him. "Mom, are we going to the hospital for a shot?" Brian asked me in a low, slightly fearful voice. "It's not an injection, baby." I suppressed the turmoil in my heart and tried to comfort him in a calm tone. "I just want the doctor to see if Brian is in good health." David stood a few steps away, with his back to us, looking out the window. A doctor in a white coat approached, holding a sterile collection kit. "Don't be afraid, little one. Open your mouth," the doctor said with a gentle smile, trying to ease Brian's nerves. Brian looked from the doctor to me, and only after receiving my encouraging glance did he timidly open his mouth. The doctor gently scraped the inside of his mouth with a cotton swab. "Good job," the doctor praised. David then turned around. He silently walked over to the doctor. Without needing the doctor to say anything, he took another cotton swab and quickly scraped the sample from his mouth. His movements were filled with undeniable determination and a subtle hint of nervousness. The doctor collected the 2 small tubes of samples and labeled them. "The results will be available in 24 hours at the earliest," the doctor said businesslike. "Expedited." David's voice was unyielding, carrying the pressure of a superior. "I want the results as soon as possible." The doctor, evidently recognizing him, or perhaps intimidated by his presence, hesitated before nodding. "Okay, David, we'll prioritize it." It was already dark when we left the appraisal center. "I'll take you back," David said, his tone unwavering. I said nothing, hugging Brian and getting in. The atmosphere in the small space was oppressive and suffocating. Brian, probably tired, leaned into my arms and soon fell asleep. His face was peaceful, his long eyelashes casting a small shadow beneath his eyelids. He was completely oblivious to what had just happened. David was in the passenger seat. He didn't look back. But I could see the tense lines of his face in the rearview mirror, and the occasional glance he'd make toward the back seat. That look, with a complex expression, rested on Brian's sleeping face. The car stopped downstairs in the old residential complex where I rented. I got out, carrying the sleeping Brian. David also got out of the car. "Tomorrow," he began, his voice exceptionally clear and hard in the still night. "I'll let you know as soon as the results come out." I turned my back to him, not turning back, but simply hugging the child tighter. "Tracy," his voice paused, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end it turned into a cold warning, "You'd better not go anywhere until the child's matter is confirmed." After that, he turned and got into the car. I held Brian in my arms, standing at the entrance of the dilapidated hallway. The night wind blew against me, chilling me to the bone. That cold, opulent villa felt like a giant, opulent prison. 5 years ago, I felt like Cinderella, straying into it, trembling with fear, treading on thin ice. At that time, I thought I had grasped a life-saving straw and escaped from the muddy family of origin. Later I realized that it was just another more sophisticated and suffocating abyss. David needed a gentle, quiet, and somewhat reminiscent vase of his beloved Xena to place beside him, to cope with family pressure to get married and to stimulate his distant white moonlight. And I, at the most desperate and helpless moment, fell into his trap. He gave me a comfortable material life, but also gave me the label of substitute, nailing it to me. Those expensive jewelry and gorgeous clothes were like layers of gold dust, smeared on this fake me. He would sometimes stare at my face in a trance, his eyes looking through me to see another person. When his white moonlight Xena returned home, he would mercilessly abandon me in the empty big house and disappear for several days. He would also, after receiving Xena's whiny, complaining phone calls, turn around and sneer at me, complaining that I wasn't gentle enough, that I didn't have enough artistic temperament. I was like a clown, trying to play a role that didn't belong to me, living like a joke. Until that accident. I collapsed at home from period pain. My family doctor arrived, and after a routine checkup, his expression turned grim. "Tracy, have your periods been regular lately?" I shook my head, feeling a tinge of unease. "I suggest you go to the hospital for a detailed gynecological examination." The results were devastating. My endometrium was severely damaged and had adhesions. The doctor tactfully told me that the chances of natural conception were extremely slim. I returned to my villa, devastated. I was nearly overwhelmed by overwhelming panic and despair. As a woman, the loss of my fertility was devastating. I desperately needed a little comfort, even just a little. With trembling hands, I dialed David's number. It rang for a long time before the other end picked up. The background was noisy, with elegant music and a woman's charming laughter. It was Zena's voice. "Hello?" David's voice was filled with a hint of impatience at being interrupted. "David," I said, choking with sobs and filled with helplessness. "I just came back from the hospital." "The doctor said I." "What's going on?" He interrupted me, his tone cold. "I'm with Zena at an art exhibition. She's very angry because the necklace you wore last time was a limited edition that she had her eye on." My heart instantly sank. My body. I tried to finish my sentence. "Tracy," his voice was filled with obvious impatience, "for those minor ailments of yours, just go see a doctor. I don't have time for you right now." Zena's aggrieved voice could be clearly heard from the other end of the line. "Brother David, who is that? That Tracy again? Why is she always pestering you? She's just a stand-in, just for fun, why are you taking her so seriously?" Then, I clearly heard David's deep laughter, filled with doting. "Okay, Zena, don't be angry. It's just a substitute, just for fun, why do you care? Just for fun." Boom. At that moment, the world completely collapsed. I froze in place, my phone clutched, my body cold. It turned out that in his eyes, in the eyes of his beloved white moonlight, I, Tracy, had been nothing more than a stand-in to be toyed with and discarded at will. Even my pain and despair were mere noise, insignificant in its worth. I don't know when the call ended. Silent tears streamed down my face. The pain in my heart was numb. That very night, I discovered my period, which hadn't come in a while, was now significantly overdue. An absurd, impossible thought flashed through my mind. I secretly bought a pregnancy test. When I saw the two clear lines, I collapsed on the cold bathroom floor, my mind blank. Heaven had played a huge joke on me. On the day I was sentenced to reproductive death, it granted me another miracle. A lone light in a despairing abyss. But this light also carries with it overwhelming fear. What would David do if he knew? Would he allow a substitute to give birth to a child bearing his blood? What would happen if Zena found out? She would never allow me to exist, much less this child. If this child stayed with me, he would only become a bargaining chip for David to take away, or a thorn in Zena's side. I can't lose this child. He's my only salvation in this endless darkness. A crazy plan quickly formed in my mind. I have to leave. I have to leave. Before David finds out, before Zena notices, I have to disappear without a trace. I sold all the jewelry David had given me, except the diamond necklace, for cash. I cancelled all my bank accounts and got a new phone number. Like a frightened rabbit, I carefully plotted my escape. I didn't dare fly or take high-speed trains, fearing leaving my identity behind. I took the most insignificant long-distance buses south, landing temporarily in a remote county town. Throughout my pregnancy, I lived in constant fear, hiding from place to place. I lived in the cheapest rentals and ate the simplest meals. I didn't dare go to the hospital to register, so I could only secretly buy books and take care of myself. When morning sickness was at its worst, I was emaciated. In the dead of night, feeling the faint movement of the fetus in my belly was the only thing that kept me alive. I told myself, "Tracy, hold on. For your child, you must live." Brian was born in a simple maternal and child health care hospital in the county town. The labor pains lasted for more than 10 hours, and I had almost exhausted all my strength. When the nurse placed that wrinkled, red little creature on my chest, the intense pain and extreme fatigue were instantly overwhelmed by an indescribable, surging love. Tears streamed down my face. In that moment, I knew that all my efforts and pain had been worth it. From then on, I was no longer Tracy, the sham, the one who could be manipulated. I was Brian's mother. A mother who would risk her life for her child. Over the past 5 years, with Brian, we've moved countless times. From a small southern city to a smaller town in central China, I finally arrived in this second-tier northern city, far from David's power. Life was simple, but steady. Brian was the only light in my life. I thought I had hidden myself well. I thought the nightmare was over. Until today, when I met those cold eyes again at the supermarket yogurt counter, memories washed over me like a cold tide. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Brian's peaceful face as he slept, my fingertips gently brushing his soft skin. But my heart sank to the bottom of a cold valley. Tomorrow. The results of the paternity test. What would David do if Brian really was his child? Would he take Brian away from me? With his power, I'd be powerless to resist him. No. I clenched my fists. Brian is my life. No one can take him away from me. Not even David. I spent a sleepless night. The next day, time passed incredibly slowly. Every minute and every second felt like frying in a frying pan. My phone was silent as a brick. Brian had gone to preschool. I was left alone in the small rental apartment, suffocated by the silence. I fidgeted, unable to do anything. I rehearsed every possible outcome and worst-case scenario in my mind. If David tries to take Brian away, I won't let him go. Just when my nerves were stretched to their limit, almost breaking, my phone suddenly rang. The sharp sound cut through the dead silence, and I shuddered with fear. 2 words flashed on the screen, David. It was him calling. What was supposed to happen finally came. I took a deep breath, and with trembling fingers, I tapped the answer button. Hello? My voice was dry and hoarse. On the other end of the line, there was a suffocating silence. Only his slightly heavy breathing could be heard. This silence weighed on me like a huge rock. My heartbeat, beat after beat, pounded heavily against my chest. What was he waiting for? Was he planning the verdict? Tracy, he finally said. Are the results out? I held my breath and asked this question, which almost exhausted all my courage. Yeah. He replied. Silence again. This damn silence. I felt like I was going crazy. David. Tell me whether you're dead or alive. I roared uncontrollably, my voice cracking and filled with desperate sobs. The person on the other end of the line seemed to pause for a moment. Then, I heard him say with incredible clarity and precision, the results of the paternity test are in. The probability of biological paternity is greater than 99.99%. David is Brian's biological father. Although I was mentally prepared, when this ironclad truth came out of his mouth, my vision went dark and the world spun. All the strength in my body was instantly drained away. I barely managed to hold on to the cold wall to avoid falling. It was him. It was really him. Brian was really his son. He was coming to take the child away. He was definitely coming to take Brian away. Tracy, his voice came again, with an undeniable force, take the child and move back. Don't even think about it. I interrupted him abruptly, David. Don't even think about taking Brian away from me. He's my life. He's mine alone. 5 years ago, you treated me like a substitute, a plaything. What qualifications do you have to acknowledge a child now? You don't deserve it. You don't deserve to be Brian's father. The other end of the line fell into a deathly silence. Only the sound of my heavy breathing after losing control of myself could be heard. A few seconds passed, perhaps a few seconds, or perhaps a century. David's voice rang out again. He no longer had the same force as before, but instead had a husky, almost tired, tone that I had never heard before. Tracy, he said, I didn't say I was going to take him away. I was stunned. What did you say? I say, he repeated, his tone heavy with unquestionable certainty, Brian is my son. There's no doubt about that. My heart sank even deeper. So? What do you want? So, his voice returned to its usual calmness, but it seemed to contain something else. He needs a father. And I need to shoulder my responsibilities. Responsibility? The word coming out of his mouth was ironic. Responsibility? I sneered, tears welling up in my eyes. David, you're talking to me about responsibility now? 5 years ago, when I was lying in the hospital and was told that I might never be a mother, where were you? You were accompanying your Xena to an art exhibition. You told her on the phone that I was just a stand-in, just for fun. What was your responsibility then? Did a dog eat you? There was a long, unnerving silence on the other end of the line. He seemed deeply struck by my words. After a long time, he spoke again. His voice was low and hoarse, with a tone that I had never heard before, almost difficult. Back then. He paused, as if he was considering his words, as if he was suppressing something. Back then, That's enough. I interrupted him harshly, not wanting to hear any more explanations. David, put away your hypocrisy. I don't need your explanations, let alone your belated responsibility. Brian is mine. Always. Don't even think about it. Without waiting for him to speak again, I angrily hung up the phone. I slammed the phone onto the sofa. I leaned against the wall, slumped to the floor, and finally burst into tears. What should I do? What should I do? David knew. He wouldn't let this go. He's the kind of person who, once he makes up his mind, will never let go. That afternoon, I went to pick Brian up from school, feeling uneasy. As I reached the kindergarten gate, I saw a familiar black Maybach parked there. David leaned against the car. He had changed into a more casual outfit, a dark cashmere sweater, which made him look less fierce than usual, but he still had a strong aura, attracting the attention of parents picking up their children. In his hand, he was holding a gigantic, extravagantly packaged Transformer model. Brian, being led by his teacher, was walking out when he saw the giant toy and the giant uncle he had seen yesterday. The little guy's eyes lit up instantly. Wow! Optimus Prime. Brian broke free from the teacher's hand and rushed over like a little cannonball, surrounding David and the toys in his hands. His little face flushed with excitement and his eyes were wide open. David looked down at Brian, his face expressionless, but his eyes no longer as cold as they had been yesterday. He handed the toy over. Brian took it with surprise, hugging it tightly, unable to let go. He tilted his head upwards and asked crisply, "Uncle, is this for me?" "Yeah," David replied in a low voice. "Thank you, Uncle. You're so kind." Brian's eyes curved into crescents as he smiled, clinging to his toy. Watching this, my heart felt like it was being gripped tightly by a giant hand, aching and bitter, but mostly filled with panic. He really started using material things to tempt a child. I quickly walked over and grabbed Brian's hand. "Brian, tell Mommy thank you, Uncle. We should go home." My voice was cold. Brian hugged the toy, looked at me, then at David, a look of reluctance on his face. David's eyes fell on me, a scrutiny and a subtle complexity. "I'll take you there." He opened the back door. "No." I flatly refused, clutching Brian's hand tightly. "We'll go back on our own." "Mom," Brian whispered, hugging the giant toy. "This is so heavy." David said nothing, just staring at me with a silent, oppressive gaze. People were already watching us. I gritted my teeth, not wanting to draw more attention to myself by pulling at the kindergarten door. Finally, I carried Brian in my arms and got into that breathtaking luxury car. As soon as Brian got in, he couldn't wait to unwrap his toys. David sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on Brian, who was having so much fun playing, through the rearview mirror. The only sound in the car was the scraping of plastic as Brian fiddled with his toys. "He likes this?" David suddenly asked, asking about Brian's preferences. I ignored him. "What does he like to eat?" he asked again, his tone flat, as if he were discussing the weather. I remained silent. "Is he okay?" This time, his voice seemed lower, with a subtle hesitation. I suddenly looked up and glared at him through the rearview mirror. "David, haven't you done enough research? Why are you pretending to care?" My voice was filled with sarcasm and anger. 5 years ago, you treated him like a piece of trash. Now that you know he's your son, you're pretending to be a loving father? Don't you feel disgusted? My words were as sharp as a knife. David's face instantly turned extremely ugly. He turned his head abruptly, his eyes as sharp as a knife, filled with offended anger. Tracy! Watch your attitude. His voice was cold. My attitude? I met his gaze without fear. The grievances and anger that had been pent up for 5 years completely erupted at this moment. What attitude should I have towards a man who treated me as a substitute, a plaything, and abandoned me when I was most desperate? David, can you teach me? Be servile? Be grateful? You. The veins on his forehead were throbbing slightly, and he was obviously irritated by me. Me what? I sneered, tears welling up in my eyes. David, listen to me. Brian is my child. I risked my life to give birth to him and raised him with great difficulty. He has nothing to do with you. Put away your hypocrisy. I don't want him. Brian doesn't need him either. No? He looked like he had heard a huge joke. His cold eyes swept over Brian, who was playing with toys and was completely unaware of the tense atmosphere between us. Tracy, ask yourself, what can you give him? Crammed into that pigeon cage-like rental apartment? Counting every penny to buy discounted items? Going to that ordinary kindergarten? What you call motherly love is letting him live with you in this kind of precarious, fearful life. His words, like a poisoned needle, pierced my most painful place. Yeah. What can I give Brian? What else can I give besides working hard and giving him the best I can? I couldn't afford the expensive toys he liked, the classes he envied, and even saving up for a decent playground was a struggle. The overwhelming feeling of powerlessness and the embarrassment of being exposed brought tears to my eyes. But I couldn't show weakness in front of him. Never. At least. I straightened my back, my voice filled with desperate determination. At least I gave him all my love. No deception. No exploitation. No treating his mother as another woman's shadow. David, what about you? Besides providing a sperm, what have you given him? What qualifications do you have to accuse me here? My words made David's face darken completely. The pressure in the car plummeted to its lowest point. He stared at me intently, his eyes threateningly sinister, as if he were about to explode at any moment. Brian seemed to finally sense the tension. He stopped playing with his toys and looked at us timidly. Uncle Mom, he whispered, his large eyes filled with anxiety. This call was like a bucket of cold water, instantly dousing the raging anger between us. David took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing his surging anger. He turned his head away from me. I hugged Brian tightly, burying my face in his small shoulder, trying not to let my son see the tears welling up in my eyes. The car finally stopped at the foot of the residential complex. I hugged Brian and got out of the car, practically escaping. David didn't follow. But I could feel his cold, sharp gaze following me until I disappeared into the hallway. I knew this was just the beginning. David wouldn't give up easily. He never failed to get what he wanted. Especially since it was a son who bore his blood. The next few days became a silent tug-of-war between David and me. He no longer tried to take Brian away by force, but his presence was omnipresent. Every afternoon, the eye-catching black Maybach would show up at the kindergarten gate. David would pick him up personally, always holding Brian's favorite toys, snacks, or novel children's books. Brian, initially timid, gradually got used to it and even began to look forward to it. The little guy's world is simple. He considers anyone who treats him well and gives him a toy he likes to be a good person. Mom, Uncle brought me another pair of super wings today. Lodi can transform. Brian excitedly shared his new toy with me. I looked into my son's sparkling eyes, a mixture of emotions welling up inside me. David's methods were precise and efficient. He was infiltrating his life in ways Brian couldn't resist, gradually breaking down my defenses. He even began to try to interfere with Brian's education. One evening, I was helping Brian with a kindergarten craft when there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw David standing outside. He was holding a beautiful paper bag. The logo on it suggested it belonged to one of the city's finest children's art institutions. "What's up?" I blocked the doorway, not wanting him in. He simply handed the paper bag over, his tone flat. "Brian, at his age, should get some professional art education. This institution is good. I've signed him up for weekend classes." I looked at him like an alien. "David, who are you to make decisions for Brian? Have you ever asked for my opinion?" "I'm his father," he said matter-of-factly. "It's my responsibility to provide him with the best educational resources and environment." "Father?" I laughed in anger. "Have you ever fulfilled your father's responsibilities for a single day? Now you come and tell me what to do? I told you not to." "Tracy," his eyes darkened. "Don't act on impulse. This concerns Brian's future." "The future? With a cold-blooded father like you, his future is in jeopardy," I retorted. "You." He was clearly irritated by me again. "Mom, Uncle, please stop arguing." Brian's small figure appeared behind me, pulling at the corner of my clothes, his big eyes full of fear and anxiety. David saw Brian and suppressed his anger. He squatted down and tried to soften his voice. "Brian, Uncle is not arguing. Uncle has signed you up for a painting class. Do you like painting?" Brian looked at him, then at me, and whispered, "Yes." "That's good." David stood up and shoved the paper bag into my hand, his tone unyielding. "The address and time are inside. I'll pick him up this weekend." With that, he turned and walked away. "David. Stop." I was so angry that my whole body was shaking. He paused, but didn't turn back. "I won't let Brian go." "Forget it." He finally turned around, his eyes cold and determined. "Tracy, you can't stop it. Brian is my son, and this will never change. It is my right and my obligation to give him a better life and education. If you really want what's best for him, you shouldn't use your stubbornness and prejudice to hinder his development." His words hit me like a hammer. Looking at Brian's confused yet somewhat expectant eyes, I felt a deep sense of powerlessness for the first time. Was what David said true? Was I really delaying Brian with my stubbornness? The thought tormented me. As expected, David showed up downstairs on time that weekend. Brian was holding the new drawing board he'd bought him, his face filled with excitement and anticipation. "Mom, I'm going to learn to draw." He looked up at me. I stared into his bright eyes, unable to bring myself to say no. Finally, I gave in. I silently put Brian's coat on and walked him downstairs. I watched as David took Brian's hand and carried him to the car. The car drove away. I stood alone in the empty downstairs, feeling a gaping hole in my heart, a cold wind rushing in. When Brian returned, his cheeks flushed with excitement, he shared with me what he'd drawn and how the teacher had praised him. Seeing his joy, my heart tightened even more. David was proving with his actions that what he could give Brian was something I couldn't give him, even if I tried my best. The material disparity between him and me, like a chasm, stretched between us. I felt an unprecedented panic. David seemed to sense my weakness. He began to escalate his attack. He began taking Brian to various places on weekends under the pretext of father companionship. They went to top children's parks, science museums, horseback riding, and children's meals at Michelin-rated restaurants. Every time Brian came back, he would dance with joy, describing all the new and interesting things to me, and how great Dad was. I don't know when he changed his way of addressing me, but the word Dad pierced my eardrums like a needle. He even tried to interfere in my life. Once, he came back from sending Brian and saw me busy in the small kitchen, where the range hood was old and making a buzzing noise. He frowned. "Move somewhere else." He said it flatly, as if stating something insignificant. "The environment here is too bad. I have an apartment downtown, close to Brian's kindergarten and interest classes." My hand holding the spatula paused. "David, what do you mean? A handout?" I turned and looked at him coldly. just to provide a more suitable environment for Brian to grow up in. He looked at me with a condescending gaze. It also saves you from having to squeeze on the bus to pick him up every day. No need. I threw the spatula into the pot, making a sharp sound. We live very well here. No need to worry about it, David. Very good? He sneered, his eyes sweeping across the cramped space and the mottled walls. Tracy, your stubbornness is meaningless. What good will it do you to let Brian live here? For the sake of your pitiful self-esteem? His words once again accurately hit my sore spot. My pride, however pitiful, is far superior to your use of me as a substitute, David. I retorted, ruthlessly opening old wounds. David's expression instantly darkened. He stared at me with a sinister look. You insist on dwelling on the past? Things of the past? I smiled, but tears welled up uncontrollably. David, do you think that's in the past? That's a scar on my body that will never heal. You carved it with your own hands. Why do you ask me to forget it? Why do you ask me to accept your charity as if nothing happened? I'm not giving charity. He raised his voice with a misunderstood anger. I'm just making up for it. Making up for what I owe Brian. And you? Making up for it? I felt like I had heard a huge joke, and I laughed so hard that tears came out. David, what are you going to do to make amends? Money? A house? Those expensive toys? Do you think these can erase everything you've done? Can they erase the damage you've done to me by treating me as a substitute for another woman and saying I was just playing around when I needed you the most? I pressed on, and the grievances and anger that had been pent up for 5 years completely erupted at this moment. Do you know what it feels like to be treated as a shadow? Do you know what it feels like to be lying on the operating table, being told you might never be able to be a mother, and then hearing the man you love casually call you a substitute on the phone? David. You don't know. You will never understand. Because your heart is made of stone. I pointed at my heart, my voice hoarse, tears streaming down my face. Here. The hole you poked can't be filled with mountains of gold and silver. You come to me now and ask me to make amends? It's too late. Too late. My uncontrollable crying made David completely frozen in place. He looked at me, at the hysterical, tearful woman in front of him. The look in his eyes was no longer angry, no longer cold, but one of deep shock and incredible astonishment. In the kitchen, the only sounds were my stifled sobs and the low hum of the range hood. Brian, frightened by our argument, hid in his little room, not daring to come out. A long, long time passed. So long that my tears had nearly dried. Then David slowly spoke. His voice was extremely hoarse, with a kind of almost inarticulate heaviness that I had never heard before. Operating table? What operating table? He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and a hint of subtle panic. You said operating table? What operating table? His questioning was filled with an urgent need to confirm something. Looking at the bewildered and slightly nervous expression on his face, I found it absurd and ridiculous. Pretending? He was still pretending? Oh. I forced a laugh that was uglier than crying, looking at him with cold eyes. David, you're such a forgetful person. 5 years ago, I fainted at home from period pain, and my family doctor recommended that I go to the hospital for a checkup. The results showed that my endometrium was severely damaged and had adhesions, making the chances of natural conception extremely slim. I clearly saw David's pupils shrink. His face turned pale. That day, I said, my voice filled with deep hatred and sarcasm, I called you. Do you remember where you were? You were at an art exhibition with your Miss Zena. She was acting like a spoiled child with you on the phone, saying she was mad because I was wearing the necklace she liked. Then, I heard you, David, tell her in that doting tone. I took a deep breath, enunciated each word, and clearly repeated those 2 unforgettable words, okay, Zena, don't be angry. It's just a substitute, just a joke, why do you care? Just a joke. When I said the last 4 words, David's face was beyond description. It was a look of shock, almost pale. His lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. His eyes were filled with disbelief and a huge sense of absurdity. "No, it's impossible," he muttered to himself, his voice so low that it was almost inaudible, as if he was refuting me, or as if he was trying to convince himself. "I never said that." "Didn't you say that?" I looked at him and felt that he was hypocritical to the extreme. My anger was ignited again. "David, after all this, you are still denying it? Do you think I am making up a story to deceive you? That physical examination report from that year, locked in a drawer in your study. The report that sentenced me to reproductive death. And the call log of the day I called you. Do you need me to help you recall it?" I became increasingly agitated as I spoke, my voice shrill. "That was the day. That was when I was most desperate. You dealt me the fatal blow with your own hands. David, you come and pretend to have amnesia? Act innocent? Aren't you disgusting?" "I'm not pretending." David suddenly growled, veins throbbing on his forehead, his eyes filled with confusion and a kind of rage of being wronged. "Tracy. No matter how bad David, am, I admit what I said. But I definitely didn't say that." "What do you mean by just kidding?" "I've never said that to anyone." His denial was so adamant, even tinged with a frenzy of rage, that it actually froze me. He didn't admit it? Looking at his expression at that moment, shock, anger, and eagerness to deny, it didn't seem like he was faking it. A ridiculous thought flashed through my mind. No, it couldn't be. That voice was clearly his. "You're lying." I pointed at him, my voice trembling. I heard it with my own ears. "It was your voice." "I didn't." His eyes were as sharp as a knife, and he took a sudden step forward. The strong sense of oppression made me subconsciously step back. "Tracy, please explain yourself clearly. 5 years ago, you called me. When was it?" "The specific date." "May 17th. Around 3 p.m. I blurted out, the date and time etched into my mind like a brand. David's brow furrowed tightly, his eyes piercing through me. He seemed to be recalling things at a rapid pace. Seconds later, his expression suddenly became extremely strange. Shock, astonishment, disbelief, and finally, all transformed into a deep, cold anger. That anger wasn't directed at me, but at a distant being. "May 17th, he repeated in a low voice, each word coming out through gritted teeth. "That afternoon, my phone." He suddenly raised his eyes, staring at me intently, his expression indescribably complex. "At 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone wasn't even with me." I was stunned. "What?" "That day, I accompanied Zena to see a private art exhibition." David's voice was icy, with a chill that penetrated his bones. "I went to the bathroom halfway through. I forgot my phone on the sofa in the lounge area outside." He paused, his eyes becoming even darker and sharper. "When I came back, Zena was holding my phone. She said she had just received a call and she accidentally pressed the wrong button and hung up. She even smiled and told me it was you who called and she was embarrassed to answer." Boom. Like a thunderclap, it exploded in my head. I froze in place, my body cold. Zena? Was it Zena who answered my call? Was it Zena who imitated David's voice and said those 2 words to me that made me lose all hope? This realization burned into my heart like a red-hot iron. It hurt so much that I could barely breathe. "No, it's impossible," I shook my head subconsciously, my voice weak. "That voice is clearly yours." "Tracy," David looked at me. The anger and confrontation in his eyes were gone, leaving only a heavy, cold complexity. "Zena has had a talent for imitating other people's voices since she was a child. Especially imitating my voice. She used to use this to joke with my parents." He didn't finish his sentence. But the meaning was clear. It was Zena. She was the one who had imitated David's voice, answered my call, and said those vicious words to me. It was her. I felt as if every bone in my body had been pulled out, and I leaned helplessly against the cold wall, slowly sliding to the ground. The overwhelming sense of absurdity and the even more acute pain that had been delayed for 5 years instantly overwhelmed me. So that's it. So the root of my 5 years of wandering, 5 years of fear, 5 years of pain and despair is precisely here? Because of a woman's jealousy and calculations? Was it because I overheard those words, so disheartened that I fled in a hurry with this unexpected child in my belly? What a cruel joke fate played on me. I sat on the ground, covering my face, my shoulders shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't crying. It was laughing. A laugh even harder than crying, filled with endless sadness and irony. David stood before me, his tall figure casting a shadow. He looked at me with a complex expression. Shock, heaviness, and perhaps a subtle hint of regret. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me in silence. A long moment passed. So long that I tired of laughing, only numb exhaustion remained. David then slowly crouched down, his gaze level with mine. His gaze was no longer one of condescending scrutiny, but held an unprecedented solemnity and a hint of inquiry. So, he began, his voice low and hoarse, you left because of what you heard? Because you thought you were infertile, and after hearing what I said, you became disheartened? I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes wearily. So, he continued, his tone cautiously confirming, you chose to disappear completely after you found out you were pregnant? Because you were afraid it would be bad for the child, either me or Xena? He guessed it. He guessed all the reasons for my hasty escape. I remained silent. Silence was a sign of agreement. The small kitchen fell into a deathly silence once again. Only the faint sound of traffic outside the window could be heard. David squatted in front of me, silent for a long time. I could feel his gaze on me. It was heavy, complicated, and filled with countless indescribable emotions. A long moment passed. His deep voice broke the silence, carrying an unprecedented solemnity. Tracy. I'm sorry. I slowly opened my eyes and met his deep gaze. Gone were the usual coldness and arrogance, the anger and need for control. Only a heavy, almost frozen regret remained. This apology is 5 years late. He looked at me, each word spoken slowly and clearly, carrying a tremendous weight. It was my negligence back then that put you in that situation. It was my failure to protect you that caused you to endure the pain and deception you shouldn't have endured. His eyes met my scrutinizing, distrustful gaze. As for Xena, at the mention of her name, his gaze instantly grew icy and sharp, carrying a chilling chill. I'll take care of this matter. I'll get what she owes you. He paused, his eyes returning to my face. There was something in them I couldn't decipher. As for Brian, he lowered his voice, almost pleading, Tracy, give me a chance. A chance to make amends. A chance to be a father. He looked at me, his eyes more serious and vulnerable than ever before. I know the hurt of the past can't be erased. I don't dare ask for your forgiveness, he said with difficulty, as if he was not used to saying such words of weakness. I just hope that for Brian's sake, you can give me the right to be close to him and accompany him as he grows up. I won't force you to move in with me. I won't interfere with the way you raise Brian. He made the promise, his tone more resigned than ever before. I just want to do my best to give Brian the best he can have. I also want to make up for the lack of my fatherhood over the years. And he hesitated, staring deeply at me, as if to see into the depths of my soul, to you, Tracy. I know, I'm an asshole. I was blind. I mistook fish eyes for pearls and mistook sincerity for grass. His voice was low and hoarse, carrying a belated, heavy pain. You must have suffered a lot in the past 5 years taking care of Brian. I am sorry for you and your son. I don't dare ask you to accept me back. He twitched the corners of his mouth in self-mockery, his smile bitter. I just hope you can give me a chance to prove that I, David, won't always be such a jerk. Give me a chance, he repeated, his eyes filled with desperate determination. To get to know you again, Tracy. Not as someone else's replacement, but as yourself. After saying this, he seemed to have exhausted all his strength. He just squatted there, staring at me quietly. In his eyes, there was regret, hope, caution, and even a hint of humble pleading. This was completely unlike the arrogant, cold-blooded David I knew. I looked at him. I looked at this man squatting before me, admitting his mistakes and begging for a chance. My heart was in turmoil. 5 years of hatred, 5 years of grievances, 5 years of pain seemed to have found an outlet at this moment, but were thrown into chaos by the sudden truth and apology. Hate? Hate. Hate Zena's malicious schemes. Hate David's carelessness and indifference back then. Hate Fate's tricks. But looking at this man with complex eyes, with unprecedented vulnerability, seeing the regret and longing that could not be concealed in his eyes when he mentioned Brian. My heart was in a tangle. Did Brian need a father? The answer was a resounding yes. This past month, despite my resistance and rejection, I had to admit that David's involvement had brought Brian much joy and broadened his horizons. Was David's apology today sincere? Could he keep his promise to change? I don't know. I really don't know. Silence stretched between us, like an invisible river. Finally, I closed my eyes in exhaustion. My voice was hoarse and weak. David, Brian is your son. I can't change that. You have to fulfill your father's responsibilities. I won't stop you. I paused, opened my eyes, looked directly into his suddenly bright eyes, and clearly drew a line in my words, but there's no other possibility between you and me except Brian. The past can't be erased with just an apology. The scars will always be there. I won't stop you from seeing Brian, nor will I stop you from being nice to him. But please remember, this is only because you are his biological father. As for you and me, the best relationship we have is that of Brian's parents. That's all. Please, don't cross the line. My words, like a bucket of cold water, extinguished the little hope that had just ignited in his eyes. His eyes dimmed instantly. But he didn't argue. He just nodded silently. I understand, he said in a low voice. He stood up, his tall figure looking a little lonely. I'm leaving first, he whispered. I'll pick Brian up to go to the art museum this weekend. He loves it there. After saying this, he gave me a deep look. That look was complex and hard to decipher, pain, loss, unwillingness, and perhaps even a subtle, rekindled sense of determination. Ultimately, he said nothing and turned away. The door closed softly, isolating him from his retreating figure. It also separated us from the tangled, scarred past. I remained seated on the floor, leaning against the cold wall. I was alone in the kitchen. And outside the window, the setting sun was visible. The heavy weight that had weighed on my heart for 5 years seemed to loosen a little. But a new sense of confusion and heaviness quietly settled over me. What would the future hold? I didn't know. I only knew this, for Brian, I had chosen to compromise. But that was all I had to compromise. The chasm between David and me, called the past, was too deep and too wide. Too deep to fill. Too wide to cross. Life continued in a new, subtle way. David became a frequent visitor in Brian's life. At a fixed time every week, he would pick Brian up, take him to various places, and fulfill his various little wishes. Brian was visibly happy, and his little face was often filled with happiness. He would excitedly share with me, "Mom, Dad took me to ride a big rocket. It flew so high. Dad taught me how to build a Lego aircraft carrier. It's so huge. Dad said he would take me to see real dinosaur fossils next week." Hearing my son call me Dad so naturally and affectionately, my heart felt like it was soaking in warm water, both warm and bitter. David was truly trying to be a good father. He no longer tried to interfere in my life, and he never again mentioned asking me to move or accepting his material compensation. He adhered to that invisible boundary. He was just Brian's father. Nothing more. The way he looked at me was still complicated. Sometimes it was probing, sometimes hesitant, sometimes filled with a heavy emotion I couldn't understand. But I studiously ignored it. I found a new job as a planner at a sizable advertising agency. My busy schedule left me with less time to dwell on the mess between David and me. Life seemed to be entering a new trajectory. Calm, even a bit peaceful? Until that weekend. David took Brian to a newly opened, massive children's park in a neighboring city. The plan was for 2 days and 1 night. Brian was incredibly excited. Although I felt a little disappointed, I still packed his small suitcase. Watching David's car disappear around the corner, carrying his cheering son, I took a deep breath and plunged back into my mountain of work projects. It was late at night. I was still working overtime at my computer when my phone suddenly started vibrating frantically. It was David calling. So late? My heart sank, and a sense of foreboding gripped me. Hello? I picked up the phone immediately, my voice nervous. Tracy. David's voice came, unusually rapid, even with a hint of panic I'd never heard before. Brian has a high fever. It just suddenly reached 40 degrees Celsius. He even had a convulsion. What? Where? I stood up so suddenly that my chair fell over, and my voice changed. It's in the emergency room of the children's hospital near the park. We're at. He gave an address, speaking rapidly. Don't worry, be careful on the road. The doctors are treating it here. I'll be right there. I grabbed my car keys and bag and rushed out the door. The highway was eerily empty late at night. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, and tears were streaming uncontrollably. Brian, my baby, please don't let anything happen to you. My mind kept flashing back to the time when Brian was sick as a child, and I'd held him in my arms all night in the small clinic, unable to sleep. The 2-hour drive felt like a century. Finally, I rushed into the emergency room of that hospital. The emergency room was brightly lit late at night, filled with disinfectant and anxiety. I spotted David right away. He stood at the door of the infusion room, his tall figure slightly hunched, no longer his usual upright and composed self. In his arms, he held a tiny, blanket-wrapped figure. It was Brian. The little fellow had his eyes closed, his face flushed red with fever, a fever-reducing patch on his forehead, and an 4 in the back of his hand. David held him, his movements somewhat stiff, yet cautious, as if he were holding the most precious porcelain in the world. He lowered his head, resting his chin lightly on Brian's burning forehead, his eyes fixed on his son's flushed face, which was filled with undisguised anxiety, heartache, and fear. It was an expression I had never seen on his face before. Fragile, helpless, like a child afraid of losing their favorite toy. Hearing footsteps, he jerked his head up. Seeing it was me, his tense expression seemed to relax, but the worry and bloodshot in his eyes remained undimmed. Tracy, he said hoarsely. I rushed over, my heart clenched. Brian. I gently stroked my son's burning face with trembling hands, tears streaming down my face. Baby, mommy's here, mommy's here. Brian opened his eyes in a daze, and when he saw me, his little mouth pouted and he hummed softly in grievance, Mom is uncomfortable. Mom knows, baby, don't be afraid, the doctor is here. I choked and wanted to take the child from David's arms. David hesitated, his arms tightening around him, as if reluctant to let go. He just fell asleep, and I'm afraid he'll wake up if I toss and turn him around, he explained in a low, tired voice. Looking at his bloodshot eyes and the blue stubble on his chin, watching him hold Brian so carefully, as if trying with all his strength, my outstretched hand stopped in midair. Finally, I nodded and sat down in the chair next to him. She stared at Brian without blinking. Time passed slowly. The nurse came over and changed the bag of medicine. Brian's temperature finally began to slowly drop under the effect of the medicine. With my gentle soothing words, the little one fell into a deep sleep again. His breathing, though still a little rapid, was much more steady than before. My tense nurse relaxed a little. A wave of exhaustion and dread washed over me instantly. I leaned back against the cold chair, feeling completely drained. What's going on? I asked hoarsely, looking at David beside me. He was still holding Brian, his movements a little stiff, obviously not used to it, but he stubbornly refused to let go. He was fine at dinner at the theme park restaurant that night, he said in a low, hoarse voice, full of self-blame. We were too excited all day, and maybe he was sweating and exposed to the wind. Not long after we got back to the hotel and took a shower, he started complaining of being cold. I took his temperature and it was over 38 degrees. I gave him some antipyretics, thinking that would keep it down. He paused, his Adam's apple rolling, his eyes filled with fear. In the middle of the night, I suddenly had a burning fever and even had a convulsion. His voice trembled slightly. I was terrified. I looked at him. I saw the exhaustion and shock in his eyes. I saw how he held Brian, as if he were facing a threat, as if the child would disappear if he let go. I saw the stubble on his chin and the wrinkled shirt. How could this still be the aloof, cold-blooded David? This was clearly just an ordinary father, terrified and at a loss of what to do after his child's sudden illness. A complex wave of emotions welled up in my heart. There was heartache for Brian. There was gratitude for his prompt medical care. And there was also a touch of indescribable emotion. Thank you for bringing him here, I whispered. David looked up at me. I'm his father, he answered simply, his tone incredibly serious. He lowered his head, looking at Brian sleeping in his arms, his eyes incredibly gentle. Seeing him so miserable, His voice dropped to a deep, nasal tone, I wish I was the one who got sick. Those words, like a stone dropped into the lake of my heart, sent ripples through the depths of my silent soul. I looked at him. I looked at this man, cradling a sick child in the dead of night, revealing his true, vulnerable side. Seeing the genuine heartache and self-blame in his eyes, the hard, cold barrier in my heart seemed to crack a tiny crack. I silently took out a wet wipe from my bag and handed it to him. Wipe it off. He was stunned for a moment, looking at me with some surprise. Then, he took it and wiped his face and neck roughly. You should rest for a while too, I said. Let me hold you for a while. He hesitated for a moment, but finally, carefully handed Brian to me. The little one nuzzled into my arms, found a more comfortable position, and fell into a deeper sleep. David sat beside me, his body slightly relaxed, but his eyes remained fixed on Brian. Silence flowed between us. The tension and deliberate distance from before were gone. Only a strange calm remained, a shared worry for the child. Tracy, he suddenly said, his voice soft. I'm sorry. Those 3 words again. But this time, they seemed to hold more. Back then, he began with difficulty, I was too conceited and too blind. I kept you by my side, but never truly understood you or cared about you. I caused you so much injustice, including the incident with Zena. He paused, his voice thick with regret. You and Brian have suffered these past 5 years. This apology is too late. I held Brian in my arms, silent. I simply stared at my son's peaceful face as he slept. Hatred? It didn't seem so intense anymore. Resentment? Seeing him cradling a sick Brian, his genuine vulnerability revealed, it faded considerably. What remained was a complex, indescribable emotion. It's all over. After a long moment, I whispered. It felt like I was talking to him. It felt like I was talking to myself. David tilted his head and looked at me deeply. In the dim light, his eyes burned. Tracy, his voice was low and clear, with a determination to burn all bridges. I know the past can't be changed. I also know that I hurt you too deeply. I don't dare to expect too much. I just want you to give me a chance. A chance to pursue you again. Not as Brian's father. Just as a man pursuing a woman named Tracy. His words, like a boulder dropped into a calm lake, sent a tidal wave through me. I looked up, shocked, and met his deep, dark eyes. There was no trace of the usual coldness and calculation. No more condescending almsgiving. There was only a frank, burning, desperate sincerity. Like a blazing flame, it threatened to burn me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. "You don't be so quick to reject me." He interrupted me, his eyes filled with unprecedented earnestness and a hint of nervousness. "Tracy, I know this is sudden. I also know that what I did in the past makes it difficult for you to trust me again. I don't ask you to accept it right away. I just hope you can give me a chance to get closer to you, to understand you, and for you to get to know me again. This time, there will be no substitutes, no deception, no exploitation. It's just me, David, and my determination to make amends and start over. I'll prove it with time. Prove I'm serious." He looked at me, his eyes frank and blazing, with an unmistakable determination. Under the pale light of the emergency room, his outline was a little blurry. Only his eyes, astonishingly bright, shone. I held Brian in my arms, feeling his steady, warm breath. I watched the fiery fire in his father's eyes. My heart was filled with a profound sense of bewilderment and an indescribable throbbing. The future, at this moment, seemed to have been ripped open into a new, unknown space. Brian's fever finally subsided at dawn. Like a victorious soldier, he looked a bit listless, but in much better spirits. He nestled in my arms, sipping the hot porridge David had specially brought him. David sat in a chair beside the bed, sleepless all night. His eyes were dark, and the stubble on his chin was more noticeable, making him look a little disheveled. But his gaze remained tenderly fixed on Brian, and from time to time he would reach out and touch his forehead. "Dad," Brian finished his porridge and felt more energetic. He stretched out his little hand that hadn't received the injection and grabbed one of David's fingers. "Will you go see that big dinosaur again next time?" David held his son's hand with his backhand, his voice softer than ever before. "Look. When you get better, Dad will take you to see the biggest Tyrannosaurus Rex." "Yeah." Brian smiled contentedly, his big eyes curved, and he leaned his little head on my arm dependently. I watched this scene unfold. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the huddled figures of one large and one small. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and a strange warmth. David raised his head, his gaze passing over Brian to my face. The look in his eyes remained complex, but less tentative and weighty than before, now filled with frank inquiry and cautious anticipation. He didn't mention what he'd said last night. But I understood his gaze. He was waiting. Waiting for an answer. Or perhaps, waiting for a possibility. I lowered my head and gently kissed the soft top of Brian's head. The milky scent of the little guy mixed with the smell of medicine strangely soothed my troubled mind that had been in turmoil all night. Outside the window, the hustle and bustle of the city gradually awakens. A new day begins. It brings with it the fatigue of recovering from illness, the tangled past, and the weight of a future filled with unknown possibilities. I raised my head and met David's gaze. I didn't answer immediately. I simply nodded gently. It was a very gentle gesture, but it was like the first stone dropped into a calm lake, creating ripples of silence. A light suddenly lit up in David's eyes. Like the first ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds at dawn. Burning, bright, full of silent promises and heavy hopes. The road is still long. The scars may always be there. But for the dependent, satisfied smile on Brian's face. And for the faint, yet unignorable, throbbing in the depths of my heart. Maybe I could really try to start over.